Hello everyone, this is Otman Al once again in another recording concerning your course 118. By now, all of you should have been working on your final stage of your writing term paper. And here, I would like to draw your attention to consider what we are going to do in this lecture before submitting your final draft of your term paper. If you looked at your account on BB, you might have seen that we set it in such a way that you could have several attempts to check plagiarism issues. However, it is very important that after the writing up stage, you must do proofreading, and this is what we are going to explain and discuss in our lecture today. Okay, so as you can see, the title of our unit is Writing and Proofreading. Of course, we refer to rewriting of the document that you are going to submit for your final draft term paper. So, proofreading, which is very important, is needed in more than one case. We're not going to talk about unnecessary details, but generally, as you know, in exams, you have no time for rewriting, but for coursework such as the term paper you are working on right now, you may have some time to revise your work in order to improve its clarity and its logical development. I mean, you have some adequate time to go over your work once again after you finish the writing up stage in order to make sure that everything is clear and presented in a logical development. So in both situations, I mean, whether you are doing exams, doing some writing some work in exams or doing term paper, in both cases proofreading is essential to avoid small errors that may make parts of your work inaccurate or difficult to understand. Therefore, we're going to see how can we deal with proofreading. Now, to go right away to our core points in this lecture, you see, after completing your first draft, you should read it again. Then you have to ask yourself the following questions. Does this fully answer the questions in the title? Of course, here we are talking about the context of your term paper. Does the different sections of the paper have the right way? For example, when you talk about introductions and conclusions, and we said that each one of them should not exceed more than 10% of the overall content, and that the paragraphs are distributed well, and each part addresses the outlines you have made earlier, and things like that. Part C, or question C, does the argument or the discussion develop clearly and logically? And have I forgotten any important points that would support the development? So these questions are very important to ask, I mean, before you start submitting your work. So as you can see, proofreading and rewriting is not just a matter of looking at just minor errors, but you have to consider these questions carefully before you submit your work for its final draft. Therefore, let's try to have a look at a sample which explain this. So, to be practical, let's start with an example here. So the first practice here, this is a text being given as part of a module on qualitative research methods that someone has written, and its title is this: what would be an acceptable number of interviews to carry out for a master's dissertation? Now, this is the title of the study made by someone. Assume that you did this study yourself. So here I would like you to consider the instructions here. Study the introduction to this paper below and decide how it could be improved. Listing your suggestions in the table. So let's have a very quick look at it. An interview can be defined as a conversation with a definite structure and objective. It goes beyond an everyday discussion with no particular purpose. There are many possible interviews situations, but all involve interviewer and interviewee. It's normal for the former, and of course by the former here we mean the interviewer, to ask the latter or the latter, and by this one of course we refer to the interviewee here. Direct questions and record the answers. The questions may be prepared in advance or they may occur as the interview develops. The recording is often done on paper but may also be done by audio or video recording. Interviews can take place anywhere, in street, cafe, office bar, restaurant, and so on. It's hard to say how many interviews can be carried out in one day. I personally think that 2 is the maximum because it can get very tiring. A lot depends on the subject being researched. Now this is a text. I just want to draw your attention once again that this is done as an introduction to a study with this title here. What would be an acceptable number of interviews to carry out to do for a master's dissertation? Now if you look at this one carefully here, I mean the title, and check it against if you look at the text written here and check it against the title carefully, of course when you do this again at home, you may notice the following. There is too much space given to basic points. I mean, the issue is what would be an acceptable number. You see, this is what should be emphasized here, number of interviews. But if you look at the details and you read them carefully, you find that he starts by defining the interview here, can define the structure as objective. It goes on and he continues talking about details which are very basic considered to the main question in the introduction itself. Also, if you look at the overall text, you might not see that there is a reference mentioned anywhere. So there are no references mentioned. Can you see them? Of course no. Sentences generally are very short because if you know, we said that in academic writing one of its features is that it should always have complex or compound sentences, because usually when you have concepts or ideas that are that need to be explained as they relate to each other, you most probably need to have some long compound sentences, and the sentences here are too short. If you look at the style, if you remember, we said that in academic writing features that we have to avoid personal style. I mean, the style should be impersonal. Here, if you look at this phrase here, I personally think, this is a personal style. In academic writing, you have to avoid personal style and use impersonal style rather than that. Also, one of the issues that might draw your attention here is that the question in title not addressed or not fully addressed, because the question is what is or what would be an acceptable number of interviews. I mean, here he just said, I personally think that 2 is the maximum, but he should, I mean the writer, he or she should give more details about addressing this issue, not just like giving one personal sentence expressing his own point of view like this one. He should support it by some kind of literature review or some other information or things taken from other sources. So When you finish reading your introduction, you may need to read it carefully and consider such things. Now, the same text, when we try to check it against these 5 points as criteria for checking, then it should look like this one here. You see, I mean, with these points in mind, the points we have mentioned earlier, the 5 points, the introduction could be rewritten as follows. You can have a look at it here. You see, first of all, you can see that, for example, references have been inserted. Organizing an interview involves a series of steps, and here he based his statement on a study done by Davis, 2007, and he mentioned also some other sources. You see, and all the 5 points discussed in the previous part are done here. Of course, when you go, when you find time, you can read it at your ease. So the same introduction, which has issues to do with these 5 parts mentioned here, have been addressed and corrected after proofreading in this way. So you may have some time later on and read it when you have free time. Okay, let's move to the key issue of our lecture today: proofreading. Simply, proofreading can be defined as checking your work for small errors that may make it more difficult for the reader to understand exactly what you want to say. I mean, this is part of proofreading in addition to what we have mentioned earlier. So, for example, if a sentence has just one error, for example, she has no enough interpersonal skills to handle different relationships, etc., it is not difficult to understand. But if there are multiple errors, even though they are all quite minor, then that may create a negative effect, or it might be confusing. So, for example, if you look at this sentence here, this one here has just one minor error. She has not enough interpersonal skills. You could say she doesn't have enough, or whatever. That's minor. But here, for example, if you look at this sentence, American Senate once say, truth is first casualty of war. Definitely, when you look at the sentence, you may notice that it has a lot of problems. For example, you should say, for example, an American, because here you have to be careful about using singular noun for generalization. An American itself, since it's a nationality, you have to be careful about punctuation, capitalization issues. Senate once said, you see, it should be in the past rather than say. Truth is first, or the first. You have to be careful about some missing words. The first casualty of war or of war. If it's of war, then it should be OF. I mean, spelling issues here, rather than off with double F here, which has totally different meaning here. So clearly, you should aim to make your meaning as clear as possible. You see? So here, I would like you to note that sometimes computer spell checkers do not always help you to figure out the right word, even if you think that it is correct. So, for example, here you come across, or you wrote something like this: TOW. I don't want to say it. Actually, it's tau. Tau factors need to be considered. Actually, you want to say 2 factors you need to be considered. The computer spell checker might not consider this word here, TOW, as an error, because yes, it's an English word, tau, and actually it's a verb. Actually, you mean two, TWO. You mean TWO. You see, this is 2, but you wrote it as tau. So the computer speaker or the spell checker didn't identify it as an error. You might not pay attention to this without reading the text carefully within, and you have to understand it within the context that you want to use it. Therefore, it is very important. I mean, you should note that computer spell checkers do not always help you, since they may ignore a word that is spelled correctly but is not the word you mean to use. You see, it's very important to take into account. So this is one of the points that I would like to draw your attention to. Okay, now let's have another practice here. Actually, most students make mistakes, and the most common types of mistakes that, or errors that students make in their writing or student writing, could be shown in the following categories. These, for example, errors or mistakes could be factual. I mean, they are directly relevant to some facts. So, for example, if you said corruption is a problem in many countries such as Africa, you see, here, you know that the sentence grammatically is very good. I mean, there is nothing wrong about it. But if you look at the content of the sentence here, corruption is a problem in many countries. Then such as, you know that phrases like such as, or for example, or for instance, are used for giving exemplification or giving examples. So if there is a noun here like Africa, it should be an example of the noun which is mentioned before it, or that it refers to. So when you look at countries and Africa, Africa here is not an example of a country. You see, Africa is a continent. Here he mentioned countries, not continent. So his sentence should read like this: corruption is a problem in many countries such as, for example, you could say South Africa. South Africa is a country, but it's not a continent. South Africa or Nigeria or Sudan or whatever, you see. But you can't say Africa, because Africa is an example for a continent rather than a country. Sometimes the error could be doing with the word ending. For example, she was young and innocent. Young and innocence. You have already learned in your orientation in your courses grammar that if you have a conjunction like and there is an adjective before young and you want to describe the same noun mentioned earlier, after and, if you have an adjective, then you have to use an adjective here. So when you look at innocence here, innocence is a noun, and from the context here you understand that this word should modify or describe the pronoun she here, which was being described as young. So since young is an adjective and there is the conjunction and, after the adjective you should have another adjective, and the adjective here should be innocent rather than innocence. I mean, you have to delete the CE here, the CE, and you just add T. So innocent become an adjective, and in that case your sentence could be correct after proofreading. Sometimes the error could be relevant to punctuation. For example, what's the optimum size for research team? He puts a full stop here, and in fact it's a question, and as you know, a question should end with a question mark rather than a full stop. Sometimes errors could be directly relevant to tenses. If you look at this example here, since 2005 there were 3 major earthquakes in the region. Now you have since. If you come across a word like since, already, yet, for, and so on, you know that, and you are not talking about some specific time mentioned in the context here, then you need to use a present perfect rather than simple past tense. He said here, since 2005 there were 3 major earthquakes. Here the time is unspecified, although this starts from the 2005. We don't know till when. Therefore, in this context, you need to use present perfect rather than past simple tense. So you could say, for example, since 2005, there have been, instead of were, have been 3 major earthquakes in the region. And the clue here is since. I mean, if you just want to use 2005 alone as a specific point of time, as you have learned in grammar, you could say, in the year 2005 there were 3 major earthquakes in the region. In that case, your sentence could be acceptable if you just mentioned the time expression here. But once you said since 2000 blah blah blah, then definitely you need to use present perfect rather than simple past. Sometimes it might be something to do with vocabulary. Here, for example, flexibility is vital to the successfulness of a company operating in China. Successfulness. Here, successfulness. You know that sometimes you can add some affixes to certain words to change it, for example, from a noun to an adjective and whatever. But here, there is nothing in English which is called successfulness. You have success or successful. So you don't need to use successfulness here. I mean the word as complete with NESS here, as being completed with NESS here. So you just need to use success. You can say, for example, flexibility is vital to the success of the company. You see? Sometimes it could be a spelling, and the spelling is, in a way or another, sometimes could be directly related to the way you pronounce words. So if someone has some pronunciation problems, particularly when some people try to insert vowel sounds in between consonants, like for example this word here, I think this person here wants to say previous, but because he pronounced it as previous, so he wrote it the way he pronounced it. But in fact, there is nothing like this in English. We don't have anything which is called previous. We have previous. So there is a spelling issue here. It should be previous, P-R-E, then V-I-O-S, rather than what is written here. Errors sometimes could be directly related to subject-verb agreement or singular plural. For example, it is one of the largest company in Asia. It is one of the largest companies. You see? Just like we say, Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest countries in the Gulf. One of the biggest countries. Yeah, I mean, when we say one of, that means there is a group. You see? And what is this group being indicated? So the noun is here, and it should be plural here. So it is one of the largest companies, rather than saying one of the largest company. Sometimes the error could be directly related to your style. For example, finally, the essay will conclude with the conclusion. Here, there is some kind of redundancy here. I mean, you mentioned the word conclude and conclusion, and both of them refer to the same root. So you could say, for example, finally the essay will end with, or finish with, or I mean, you have to avoid repeating words which refer to the same root. Look at number 9 here. This is an idea established by David Ricardo in 19th century. Actually, there is just one 19th century. We call it 19th century. So since it is only one, and it has to be preceded with the definite article that. Here, see? Then your sentence should read like this. This is an idea established by David Ricardo in the 19th century. So please pay attention to things like this one. Sometimes the error could do with word order. For example, three skills for I think here there is a mistake. Yes, are for needed success in the academic world. Sorry, in the academic world. Three skills are needed for. You see? So when you read it at the beginning, you feel that you are confused, as I did here. You see? Three skills are needed. This one should be here. Are needed for the success, or for success in the academic world. So these are the things that are quite common, or the errors that are quite common in students writing. So you have to pay attention to them. And if you want to check these errors for the exercise or the activity we have just done, you can just have a look at them here on this sheet here. Let's take another example. Products like Tiger biscuits are well known to kids. This one has to do with the style, because we know that said in academic writing you have to make sure that you use formal style rather than informal style, and you have to avoid words like kids. So instead of kids you should say children. You see, you have to use children instead of kids. In this example here, both companies focus on mass marketing to promote its line of products. Both companies, you talk about how many companies? Two. So now continue reading. Focus on mass marketing to promote its. Its here, as it is used, should refer to a singular, but you talk about two companies here. So instead of its, it should be their. You see, because this one should agree with the subject mentioned at the beginning of your sentence here. Example 3. Failure to find the right coffee may lead to torment for consumers. This is a very strong word here. There is no need for a word like this one here. I mean, if you are trying to use some kind of sophisticated language, yes, you can use it, but not I mean, you have to be careful about the context where you are going to use it here. For example, torment here is not required. I mean, instead of that, you can simply use inconvenience rather than this word here. Different researchers have differently effects on the research. Have differently. Is there any need for using the adverb here? Different researchers have different effects, because you want to use a word which modifies or describes effect here, and effect here is a noun, and since this is a noun, you need an adjective to modify it or to describe it rather than an adverb. Therefore, there is no need for using differently here, and instead of that you can just use different rather than differently here. And it goes on like this, and you can see the answers here. For example, sometimes you might not pay attention to the errors if you don't concentrate. Here, for example, the company selected Budapest in Hungary for setting up its research center. Here, the word Hungary, you are referring to Hungary as a country, and this is not a country. Yes, Hungary is an adjective here, but it should be written correctly if you are referring to Hungary as a country. So it should be Hungary, A-R-Y, not R-Y directly. And you can continue on by looking at all these examples, and you can see the comments made about each point on the right side part of the sheet here. Now let's take another practice, and here imagine that you have come across, or you have written a paragraph or a text like this one here, and you want to proofread it, or you want to go over it once again before you consider it as your final text. So let's have a look at it here. The instructions say underline the errors in the paragraph below and correct them. Okay, bicycle is one of the most efficient machines ever designed. Okay, I think we have a problem here. You are talking about bicycle is one of the most efficient machine ever designed. You could say there's something missing here. You are referring to some specific item here. So I think you should say the bicycle is one of the most efficient machines. Again, there is an S missing here, just like the example you have mentioned earlier. So there is a missing article here, which is the bicycle is one of the most efficient machines. You see, there is something missing here, which is the S, ever designed. Cyclists can travel 4 times than walkers. I think within this context, if you look at the sentence here, cyclists can travel 4 times, or I think the guy here means 4 times, you see, faster than walkers when using less energy to do so. There are 2 errors here. Can you guess what are they? Cyclists can travel 4 times. This is the problem here. It should be 4 as a number, F-O-U-R, not F-O-R, 4 times. And the clue that tells you that this is a number is the word time. I mean something which is repeated 4 times. Faster than walkers when using less energy. someone is trying to emphasize the pronunciation of the word energy, and it is reflected through his spelling here. So energy, I think there is spelling error here, and as you can see, it has been underlined by the spell checker. If you are using keyboard skills, you can easily figure it out. So energy, E-N-E-R, not O-R. Various people invented early versions of the bike. Now here we have something to do with the style. I mean, if you are using formal writing, I think it's better to use bicycle rather than bike, which is used in spoken language rather than this one here. But the first model, I think here there is another problem also. Model. I don't know whether it's an English word like this or not, but model should be M-O-D-L, sorry, E-L, model. E-L. You see? So, but the first model with pedals which was successful mass produced was make. How can be was make? Was made, because this is passive structure. Was made. And of course when you want to use passive structure, you have to use one of the tenses of the verb to be followed by the past participle or verb 3 of the tense rather than using the basic form of the verb. So it was made. So make should be changed into made by a Frenchman. Now Frenchman is a nationality, and nationalities should always be written with an uppercase letter or capital letter here. So it should be capital F, Frenchman. Ernest Machu. On 1861, I think you have learned in grammar that if you want to talk about a year alone or a month alone, we use the preposition in rather than on here. Later additions, I think there is a spelling mistake here. You see, it should be double D, A-D-D, rather than one D here. So you have to pay attention to things like this. Include the pneumatic tires and gears. Today, hundreds of millions of bicycles are in use over all the world. What about this one? Are in use over all the world. Is it an English expression? I think you have to say it is used all over the world. Here, I mean, there is word order. It should be all here should be mentioned before over. It should be all over the world rather than the first one here. So let's just keep it as it is so that you can do the exercise once again, and you could check your answers here. For example, the bicycle. This is the first mistake that we said when we mentioned that there is a missing article, that because you are referring back to one specific invention, is one of the most efficient. Here I think there is spelling error here. Efficient machines, subject verb agreement, and all the mistakes that we have, all the errors we have mentioned have been highlighted in red here. Here, for example, instead of bike, which is used in informal way, you have to use bicycle rather than bike, and the errors we have just indicated we have mentioned are indicated here in red. And that is everything for today. So just to recap, I would like you to pay attention that when you want to, before you start submitting your work for the final draft, just start by asking yourself the 4 questions given here in order to make sure that all the key points we have discussed through the course concerning your term paper, and particularly in the introduction, which is the most important part of your work, have been fully addressed by trying to answer these 4 questions here. Then you have to pay attention to things that must be given some attention, and try to avoid the 10 or the most common errors committed by students while they are doing any written task. And that is what you should take into account before submitting your final draft on Blackboard. So you just need to remember that on Blackboard they have given you 3 attempts. The first 2, more than 3 actually. The first few attempts are just for checking plagiarism issues, but Once you are satisfied with plagiarism issues, you have to be careful also about doing some kind of proofreading to consider the logical development and clarity of your work, as we have mentioned at the beginning of this lecture here. So that's almost everything for today, and inshallah I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Until then, I wish you all the best. Thank you.